Hello everyone. So now you should be able to hear me. I think with 16 people in the room plus the host, I think we can start the webinar now. So from our side, a very warm welcome to this webinar of the Swiss NGO Jana platform. The webinar today is on ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction, and it will last 75 minutes. So before we start, I'll just like to share with you a few housekeeping rules. Please keep yourself on mute during the webinar, so there is a possibility to interact through the chat. So the webinar will last 75 minutes. And we will take turns between presentations and opportunities for you to ask questions, so as to make it a bit more interactive and keep you interested throughout the whole time. During the presentations, you can ask questions using the chat function on the left of that screen. And we will address these questions once the speakers have completed their presentations. We have foreseen 2 Q&A sessions in total. And in case you experience difficulties, please address these in the chat. And we will help you. I just see there are 2 people not able to hear me. So my colleague Theorine is addressing this with you, all right? The webinar slides after this webinar will be made available via drplatform.org/learning, and we are also recording this webinar. Before we start with our slides, I'll just give you a brief background on the Swiss NGO Jana platform, the host of this webinar, to those of you who are not yet familiar with it. So the platform is a network of 17 Swiss-based NGOs, and it was founded in 2011 among 17 organizations that are working on disaster risk reduction and climate change. The platform is dedicated to increase the resilience of women and men through an integrated approach to disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, working on 3 pillars: capacity building, conceptual support, and technical support on a Swiss approach to DRR, and advocacy and networking. If you'd like to know more about us, visit us online via drplatform.org. Who is sitting here in, or who is going to present to you? So far you only heard my voice. We are 2 presenters today and 2 people in the background, not less important. So I'd first like to introduce Saalismaa from Zoe Environment Network, and she's project manager at the network and based in Geneva, and she will provide the largest part of the presentations, being an eco-DRR expert, and she'll say a few words more about herself later. My name is Jana Junghardt, and I am advisor for disaster risk reduction with Caritas Switzerland and a core group member of the aforementioned Swiss NGO DRR platform. Then my colleague Roman is sitting in the same room, and he'll assist you and assist us with managing the chat and any questions that come up. And we also have Theorine in the room, who is our IT expert, and if there are any technical questions, you can get back to him directly. Okay, one last task, or one first task to you on just one second. On your screen, you should now see a gray black bar left to the presentation. Yeah? Please click on marker, the second from the top, and make a dot or a cross on the whiteboard on your screen. The question is related to ecosystem-based DRR. I do rather feel like a fish on a tree, so still quite lost, or a fish in the water, very confident on that topic. So please make a dot or slash or cross on the screen, so we have an overview of the audience. Okay, I see things happening. Okay. So let's see how we can work with these interesting paintings. Okay.
I think they really look like hieroglyphs to me, so we can interpret these later on.
Exactly, I think so too. Okay, thank you very much for that first impression of where you stand. I see we have quite a big range of knowledge and experience on ecosystem-based DRR. So before I continue to speak about the settings, I would say we get right into the topic now. And I hand over to Nina for our main presentation. Thank you.
Sorry, I think we had a little microphone issue here, so I would like to start my presentation by saying Happy International Women's Day to you all. My name is Nina Saalismaa, and as Jana presented me already, I am from Zoe Environment Network. I have been involved in EcoDRR for about 10 years. I come to this really from the environmental community side, from the environment and development community, and not so much really from the DRR practitioner side. The presentation today will have these three areas. We will really focus on the key issues that practitioners should know about ecosystem approaches to DRR, and we will present the concept, how to apply it in practice, including a case study, and then finally show you some of the practical tools that are available for implementation, yeah, and some further reading resources. So first on the concept. So there are really a number of terms used to describe the approach that is our topic today. And you can see in this cloud examples like ecosystem-based DRR, eco-DRR, natural solutions or nature-based solutions, green or natural infrastructure, ecosystem approach, ecosystem-based adaptation EBA, ecosystem restoration, and even ecological engineering or renaturing. So although all of these have their kind of own emphasis and origin, but I think especially to the practitioner, they are really just overlapping terms that can in most cases be used interchangeably. And it's a bit similar to the, I'd say, to the disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation concepts that are also overlapping, and the choice of which one to use really depends often on whom you are talking to and in which context, rather than really like a clear difference or big difference in the action itself. And what the kind of multitude of terms also tells us is that in the past years and decade, we've seen really a growing attention to relying on nature-based solutions to address global challenges. And what you can see on this graph are some of the kind of root causes or global challenges at the bottom. And one of them is the degradation of ecosystems. And then, of course, we have climate change, so on. And with ecosystem-based approaches such as floodplain restoration, we can provide solutions that address several challenges. And in the essence, this means that we understand the interdependency of human ecological systems, the fact that we depend on the services that ecosystems provide, such as food, fresh water, raw material, pollination, hazard regulation, and so on. And that we have to conserve and ensure that these ecosystem services are there for us in the future as well. And that we should make use of those services, as long as we can make use of those services, but we have to do it sustainably. So when we have degraded ecosystems, then these increase disaster risk by increasing both the vulnerability of people and communities that depend on these ecosystem services, and then we also increase the exposure to hazards by reducing the physical protection that ecosystems provide to people and communities. But on the other hand, well-managed ecosystems provide natural buffers against hazards and provide services for people's livelihoods and well-being. And here we really have the choice: do we want to increase or reduce risk? And now let's next have a quick overview of the risk-reducing services that different ecosystem types and contexts provide. Wetlands and floodplains, marshes, peatlands, they all mitigate floods by storing excess water. And forests and vegetation in general, they stabilize slopes, provide protection against landslides and avalanches, and reduce the risk of soil erosion. But they also mitigate floods and droughts by storing water and releasing it slowly. Then dryland ecosystems, dryland vegetation, such as live fences, provide protection against desertification and erosion. In coastal ecosystems such as mangroves and other coastal forests, salt marshes, sand dunes, barrier islands, reefs, they all buffer against storm surges and coastal flooding during cyclones, hurricanes, coastal storms, and they also protect against slow onset changes such as saltwater intrusion and sea level rise. And in the research community, quite a lot of research has already been done on specific ecosystem features that affect ecosystem performance on hazard mitigation. And here's an example of coastal hazards. It's from a coastal management guide done by the US Army Corps of Engineers. And here in the lower column, which is titled Performance Factors, you can see that the ecosystem features that affect their performance against hazards include qualities such as the extent, height, width, density, and so on of the vegetation. And these kind of performance factors, there is research on available on all of these. Then in the urban context, nature provides, of course, important services for the urban risk reduction. One part is provided by the ecosystems that are outside of the urban areas, such as the floodplains or forests that we saw in the previous slides. but within cities, by using a smaller scale green spaces that are often called as green infrastructure, such as green roofs or vegetated swales or urban wetlands and so on, they can be created and enhanced so that we can improve stormwater management and also to increase water retention and infiltration. So here, this example, this graph here is from a green infrastructure strategy of one city in the United States, city of Hoboken in New Jersey. And in addition to managing the stormwaters, urban green spaces also reduce the urban heat island effects and of course purify water and air. So when we use natural approaches, ecosystem management, we do not only get risk reduction benefits, but we get multiple other benefits at the same time, and this is really one of the key messages. And these multiple benefits include climate mitigation through carbon sequestration, water quality through infiltration of pollutants, of course then food, raw material, local employment, and many other livelihood benefits, then increased biodiversity, so on. Whereas the classic gray or hard engineered structures such as seawalls or river channeling, they typically kind of only fulfill a single function, and in addition they often have negative collaterals such as high carbon footprints, loss of biodiversity through loss of natural habitats, and so on. So when we're making the choice between a natural or an engineered approach, our assessment should also include the benefits and the consequences and the impacts more broadly, beyond the protection against a hazard event, and this is something I'll come back to later on in my presentation. And there's already a growing base of information regarding also the cost efficiency of ecosystem approaches and the valuation of the overall ecosystem services as well. And the conclusion is that ecosystem approaches are indeed a good value for money, especially given that they have the potential to provide those co-benefits to the society and the economy. And this is also really one of the reasons for the growing uptake and investment into ecosystem approaches worldwide to address multiple global challenges. I will not go into the details of the evaluation because this is really a topic of its own, but just to flag you that there are methodologies and case studies and scientific research available on measuring the costs and the benefits of ecosystem services, including their hazard mitigation services. And here on the slide you can see there's two recent examples for your reference, these two documents that are really useful to look at some of those methodologies as well, and some of the figures that have been concluded. And then here we have some examples of how ecosystem approaches are currently recognized in global disaster risk and climate adaptation frameworks. In the Sendai framework, for example, it acknowledges that sustainable ecosystem management is a key measure for resilience. The World Bank and many others, such as the European Commission, have concluded that ecosystem approaches are cost efficient in addressing climate risks, such as extreme weather events. And then the Convention on Biological Diversity or the Climate Convention also recommend using an ecosystem approach. At the national level, many countries have adopted ecosystem-based approaches to address climate and disaster risks. For instance, the European Union has a green infrastructure strategy from 2013 already, and then the EU's flood directive also encompasses the use of natural flood management measures. In some countries like Switzerland and Japan, for example, nature has been part of disaster risk reduction measures for several decades already, and in the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, or the US, nature-based measures are adopted especially for flood management. But these are just some examples, and nature-based measures are really used around the world. In some countries more on a like ad hoc or project basis, and in others within a more kind of comprehensive national or local policy framework. So this, I see also the people are asking questions, but this finishes really the first part of my presentation. And before we move into the practice part, we would like to open the floor now, or the cyberspace, for questions. So if you have any questions regarding this part on the concept, please submit them via the chat. But we'll have also another moment, of course, as said earlier on, for questions at the end of the webinar, so you can then also make questions for the whole presentation. So we have one here. Do we have good examples for drylands and drought-affected areas? Yes, I mean there are some. I mean there's many case studies available. There's from Sahel area. There's some case studies. I'm just trying to think now who has made them. Later on in the part on references, I will present some documents that really present case studies and look at examples from different regions in the world. So those are also something where you can look at yourself on some specific context. We also have some like a compendium on good experiences on sustainable land management done under the WCAT and the Swiss NGO DRR platform as well. So for sure, yes, there are examples of that as well. Yes. Anything else that you'd like to pose now? If not, we will move on to the next part. So you mentioned a number of policies to support ecosystem-based approaches. Are these working? So yes, if you mean that for instance the national policy level and at EU level or in the country level, there is definitely already in many countries this is a shift in policy. In Switzerland as well, for example, we have seen a shift from managing floods from, let's say, engineered approaches to look at the flood management more holistically and encompassing also ecosystem management much more broadly into flood management. So for sure, really, I mean, really in many of these country examples, I mean, this is really the approach that they are implementing. Yes. And the green infrastructure strategy of the EU exactly has, I mean, whether it has been the European strategy or a national level strategy, but in the end, what we can see at the country level is that it is definitely, we have many examples from Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, the UK, the Nordic countries. So there is definitely, there's been quite a lot happening on this in the last 10 years. And then let's see. And then, of course, we have, yeah, I may have, as I said, I mentioned the policy examples mainly from the, really from the Western countries and, yeah, Japan and so on. But in many countries of the South, has been also, to my knowledge, I know more of the kind of project level examples or like more initiatives that are not necessarily at the national policy level, but it could also be that we don't, you know, I'm not an expert on all those kind of government policies on all the countries, but for sure we have many examples from the South as well in terms of implementing eco-DRR.
There's one question on how to raise awareness on DRR and what is the best approach throughout experience. I assume you refer specifically to ecosystem-based DRR, and here I would like you to wait a little bit until I have presented the case study. Maybe some aspects or some parts of your questions will be addressed there, and if not, then please ask the question again, but I think we will come to that. And then Evelyn also asked about whether we need to make a distinction between green infrastructure, eco-DRR, nature-based solutions, because in practice these approaches often converge.
Exactly, and that's what I'd like to come back to the concept part. What I said at the beginning, there's many concepts and they're really overlapping. Sometimes it depends. I mean, I wouldn't make a distinction. I mean, of course, there is a, as with every concept, they have a specific definition which is slightly different than the other one, but it also depends on who makes the definition. So if they are really the same from a practitioner point of view. If you look at natural solutions, could be that you look at as nature is, and nature-based is that you try to copy things from nature. There's these kind of differences, but in practice, I would not make the difference. Sometimes you have to maybe use the right term if you're looking for funding, but this is always the case. Do we also sometimes call things disaster risk reduction, and sometimes we call it climate adaptation, but we may be talking about the same thing. So, yeah, that's really my answer to that. I wonder if we now move on to the next part, and then we can take more questions at the end. But thank you very much. There's been many questions. I'm really pleased that that there are questions. That's always nice. So let's move. Okay, so now we move to practice. I think the slides have moved maybe a bit or something, but I wonder if I can do something because the, yeah, I think we have to just, okay, there we are. Yes, okay. So this, now when we look at practice and how we can implement ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction. This slide presents first like key principles that we should consider when planning and thinking about ecosystem-based risk reduction. And these are taken from a recent World Bank guidance document on nature-based flood protection, but really, although they're taken from this flood protection document, really the 5 principles I think really are applicable for all hazards, and I think they really nicely summarize the special considerations that are needed when developing and initiating kind of nature-based measures. So, and I will explain each of them a bit. The first one is that we should take a system-wide approach, which means that we should choose a spatial scale for our interventions or our action that is large enough to encompass the connectivity of natural systems that influence and depend on each other. So, for example, a watershed level or like a ridge to reef approach or a landscape approach. And within this spatial scale, nature-based measures also then require the participation of a larger range of stakeholders, and therefore we need also this kind of the system level understanding of the local socioeconomic and institutional context. The second one is that that the thorough assessment of the risks and the benefits of the possible measures should be conducted. This essentially means that in the risk assessments, the risk reduction functions of ecosystems should be included, and comprising how the ecosystem services also evolve over time and under future changes and also due to climate change and so on. But in addition to risk assessments, we should also undertake a benefit assessment to quantify the different co-benefits which we mentioned. The co-benefits of nature-based measures and to allow for more kind of holistic comparison to also to the traditional engineering approaches. Then the third principle is that we should aim to develop and apply quantifiable standards and protocols for ecosystems, like similar that already exist for engineered structures, this kind of standards and performance standards. And this is of course something that requires then, this need to be developed further, and we need collaboration between ecologists and engineers and to develop these standards, and also to build on the research, that the academic research that already exists on the performance of nature-based measures. And then the fourth principle is that nature-based solutions should always make use of the existing ecosystems, the native species and so on, and also comply with the basic principles of ecological restoration and conservation, which is also like scientific discipline as well, and where there is already good practice existing. So we shouldn't improvise. And this means that, again, that we should, you know, when we're doing our projects and programs, we should consult and include, you know, ecologists, the other ecosystem management specialists, the environmental community, to avoid using unsuitable species or in an unsuitable location, for example, and then those resulting unnecessary failures and so on. And then finally, nature-based solutions should adopt an adaptive management to accommodate the dynamic nature of ecosystems and the long-term trends, and this requires then kind of adaptive management. And then on the implementation, building on the principles that were presented in the previous slide, then here you can see like a snapshot of the timeline and the steps needed to implement ecosystem-based risk reduction. And it covers for the whole project cycle from preparation to monitoring and evaluation. And I will not go into detail of all the steps, but I will explain some of them. But if you are interested in knowing more, you can read full description from the World Bank guidance document mentioned at the bottom of the slide. So here, the specific aspects that require further attention when implementing nature-based solutions are listed in the green column, and then the blue column is the expected outputs from each step in the project cycle. So the first step, when we define the problem and the scope, it is important to determine the physical boundaries of the intervention area so that it is suitable for addressing the problem. As mentioned in the principles, the scope has to be, for example, at the watershed level and so on. And then the second step is to evaluate the financing options for the proposed measures. And here we should include then the green financing opportunities as well, if possible. And here I'll come back to some of the financing sources later in the presentation. Then the third step is to conduct an ecosystem hazard and risk assessment. And this is an important point. It then includes defining the various ecosystem types in the area and then assessing their extent, condition, functioning, and risk reduction potential. And then in step 4, also very important, then we identify the possible measures to reduce risk. And here we should include the nature-based solutions as the measures and evaluate whether they are good alternative or could they be like a hybrid, could there be a hybrid solution like a nature-based solutions addition to conventional gray options. And I will then later on in the presentation also present some resources that describe these nature-based DRR measures more in detail, so that then you can look at some for your specific context or the specific hazard as well. And then step 5 is the analysis of the cost effectiveness, but also the co-benefits and also the co-impacts of the possible measures. And here we can bring in the multiple benefits of the ecosystem measures, as well as the possible social and environmental impacts of the proposed measures. And then the following steps 6 to 8 are then for selecting, implementing, and monitoring the selected measures. Okay, so after the kind of the long explanation in the previous slides, this is really the key message is that do consider ecosystem services in all disaster risk reduction activities. What are then some of the challenges that exist in implementing nature-based approaches in DRR? Well, obviously it is still an emerging approach, and then we have, let's say, less lessons learned available. Then, as already mentioned, we do have less kind of solid standards and protocols available, especially compared to the conventional engineered approaches. And ecosystem-based measures are like cross-sectoral, and they require collaboration and participation of a large variety of stakeholders and experts. And this make the processes more complex. But you can also look at this from another angle and think that, okay, the kind of larger stakeholder consultation and participation can make also the results more sustainable over time with a stronger commitment through this stakeholder process. And then finally, we do need to make the ecosystem approaches more known and available, and we're doing one action today with this webinar. Financing for projects. Who finances? Here are some potential sources, especially maybe for developing country contexts here. But although most of in the list are international donors, we should not forget the local sources or the private sector, which may be able to contribute also through, for instance, through payment for ecosystem services schemes. For example, if we protect the forest in a watershed that guarantees, say, water production for a local industry, but at the same time it provides DRR benefits to the community, and then we can maybe find a financing arrangement. And then now I would like to move on to a case study. We'll hear a case study from Tajikistan, and I hand over the presentation to Jana.
Okay, so and Nina, just because we were actually thinking to have a second round of questions just after all our presentations, but since I see a few questions now, Nina, can you maybe address the question by Anna on standards for eco-DRR that are comparable to engineering standards?
No, I mean, I can't make an example of an ecosystem. Like, for instance, if you build a seawall, you have like engineering standards, like what kind of impact it has to sustain, what are the, how it has to be constructed so that it withstands this kind of impact. And then if you want to put in the same place, let's say a coastal forest, so then what is then the standard? Like what does the coastal forest have to give to you exactly in terms of like how much protection does it have to provide? What are the qualities of this forest so that it is exactly that we know what it gives and what we want, let's say. So this is a bit what we mean with the standards. So there aren't really these kind of standards yet for ecosystems, if you like, but we do know that what kind of ecosystem features increase their performance against hazards, but we haven't developed it to these kind of like globally accepted standards yet. Yeah, and from the engineering committee, I mean, I can't mention to you, I am not engineer either, but I know that there are these kind of, I mean, I can't name to you, but that's really what could be the next step also for the community to develop.
Okay, thank you, Nina. So I think we now take a brief journey for approximately 10 minutes to Tajikistan. And I'm going to present a project or a few projects that Caritas Switzerland is implementing in the country. To give you an idea of how ecosystem-based DRR, starting really from a DRR perspective, how that looks like in practice and how it has evolved. So we are traveling now to Mominabad district in the Catalan region of Tajikistan, which you can see here on the slide marked in red. Climate conditions in this area are continental with harsh winters and high levels of precipitation in spring, which coincide with snow melt. So a lot of water is suddenly being released. These climatic conditions are exacerbated, let's say, by the topography and the soil characteristics. Okay, can you hear me well? It seems that the presentation voice is very low. Okay, I'll try. Otherwise, you have the recording. So these climatic conditions are exacerbating by the topography, steep slopes in the upper parts of the watershed, up to 2,900 meters above sea level, down to approximately 1,600 meters above sea level in the lower parts, sensitive to sheet and gully erosion, with the topsoil being less, which is fertile yet very susceptible to water and wind erosion. These natural conditions are further altered by, I would call it the human factor. Integrated crop livestock production systems are one of the main sources of income in the region, and people rely on the natural resource base, with over 90% of the population keeping livestock, mostly goats, some also cattle, mainly as a social safety net to sell it in terms of financial distress, and to provide fuel through manure cakes, so to use it for heating and cooking. Governance issues, widespread poverty, population pressure, and also lack of knowledge of how to sustainably manage the land and cultivate the land, particularly on the steep slopes, lead to unsustainable land management practices. And as a consequence, the natural resource base on which people are relying so strongly is depleting. So with no access to natural gas, for example, and frequent harsh winters, as mentioned, the rural population continues to cut trees and use wood for cooking and heating. This leads to the deforestation of the steep slopes, as we could see in the first photo that I showed. Overgrazing of livestock further degrades the pasture land on accessible land to the livestock. And because of soil degradation, people are facing decreasing agricultural productivity. And in the lower part of the watershed, as you can see in the photos on the right, devastating flash floods, especially in the spring months when snowmelt coincides with heavy precipitation, threaten the livelihoods and lives of the local population. So when we look at ecosystems and ecosystem services, we are looking at forests or like vegetated land with the potential service of slope stabilization, protection from landslides, reducing the risk of soil erosion and mitigating floods. But in these areas that Caritas Switzerland is working in Tajikistan, these ecosystem services have been badly damaged over the past decades. So how do we approach this and how do we go about it? And I will briefly tell you a bit about the evolution of the approach and the measures that we implement. So here on that slide, on that photo, you can see basically a depiction of the watershed from left to right, upper zone, steep slopes, middle zone, the area that is mostly used for pasture and some small-scale agriculture, and the lower zone where the largest part of the people live. Caritas Switzerland has been present in the region for over 20 years, and at first the flood risk, or rather the flood damages, were addressed through structural mitigation in the lower part of the watershed. For example, through river dams, through training, river training, dams and riverbank protection, for example, through gabions. And increasing the preparedness of people, working with the local institutions to be able to evacuate should a flood occur. So these were first hands-on and immediate interventions. However, we soon realized that this is not enough, as the root causes that I just described for the ever-increasing disaster risk were not addressed. And to do so, to address them, we had to look at the whole watershed. So if you imagine this depiction that you can see on the slide, we basically moved from right to left and more included the whole watershed in our project approach. Since 2011, when we started working on integrated watershed management, which incorporates a lot of ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction approaches, we have increased the number of watersheds that we work in a fully fledged approach from 2 to 4 currently in the same district, and are replicating a number of measures in additional watersheds within the district and beyond. So in terms of the measures, in the upper part of the watershed, our objective is to protect the remaining natural resources and prevent its further depletion. So we have been installing forest guards, we are conserving the vegetation that is still there, and are cooperating with the forest agencies. In the middle part of the watershed, mostly pasture land and small agriculturally used land, we work towards increasing land productivity through conservation farming and pasture management to reduce the pressure on the natural resources. As said before, population is growing, so we can assume that the pressure on natural resources is increasing. So it's important to work on that. And then still in the lower zone, in the lower part of the watershed, we have continued to work on mitigation structures small-scale structures in strategic locations, and encouraging the takeover of these structures and the maintenance of these structures of the local population and the local government. Further, we promote livestock intensification and destocking to showcase alternative income sources, and very importantly, promote an increase in energy efficiency through more efficient stoves, for example, to reduce the pressure on the scarce or on the depleted resources, with the overall objective to make the ecosystem in the watershed healthier again, and unleash the potential of forests and vegetated land to reduce flood risk and contribute to the resilient livelihoods of the people. So if you look at our approaches over time, we started with preparedness and risk mitigation and have further worked towards prevention. So the attempt to prevent a hazard from happening, so to prevent a landslide from happening, to prevent erosion from happening, and in the end to reduce the flood risk to an extent that the population is not at risk anymore. And for this, we use more and more nature-based solutions, solutions that take the ecosystem into account. Why the shift? Why have we increased our scope? And I would like to get back to two slides that Nina showed in her presentation. When we started with our project, we looked at engineered approaches. This was also what was desired, and these approaches, they managed, so these dams, they managed to reduce the immediate extent and damage potential of the flooding, because they were channeling it, they were blocking it, and they were protecting the riverbed from breaking away. But that was it. And if those structures are not maintained and sensibilization is not conducted or is not rooted well within the population, then such approaches or such structures can even increase the risk if they give a false sense of safety. Therefore, looking at ecosystem management, it allows us to address much more than flood risk. So we are working, as I said, on alternative livelihoods, so alternative possibilities to earn money that would not increase or impact on the resource base, sensitize for the value of a healthy ecosystem and healthy natural resources. And it may also contribute to a better microclimate or higher biodiversity. So we are actually generating multiple benefits. Coming towards the end of my brief trip with you to Tajikistan, I would like to point the attention to the achievements. So one of our main outcomes now in our 7th year of implementation is that we have reduced land degradation in the watershed that we work in. What you see on the right-hand side is an indicative slide, which gives an insight on, or which is based on the NDVI, a vegetation index, and it shows how areas where limited or with little vegetation, which we see as a proxy for degraded land, how these have changed over the past years into watersheds. So the green line is the watershed Tukurak, in which Caritas has been working since 2011. And the blue one is Shaimari, in which we are not working, but which is very comparable to Tukurak. And you can see from the year 2012, when our actions on increased on resource conservation, on pasture management, and on agricultural conservation, when these took off, that the areas of low vegetation have increased their vegetation, basically. So the degraded land has become greener, and it has become greener at a faster pace than in the comparable watershed. Further, what I would like to point your attention to, over the course of 6 years, we can look at quite some achievements with regard to behavior change. For example, with regard to pasture management through creation of institutions in line with national policies, pasture user unions that are managing how the livestock is kept and it can graze. So through rotational grazing, through social fencing without physical fences, and through setting aside pastures for regeneration. So far 25% of the pasture land has been set aside for regeneration and can thus reduce soil erosion as well. The next step is, of course, to analyze the effect of the flood regime and the hydrology of these watersheds. However, here major effects are expected to be measurable in about 5 years' time, further down the line. And yeah, so this is still something that we are working towards. This also brings me to my next slide on the strategy and the outlook, and maybe also the main conclusion. So what does the case study that I just presented teach us? It teaches us that integrating ecosystems into disaster risk reduction is possible, feasible, and required in many cases. It also teaches us that ecosystem-based DRR may take time and may take time, as you see before. So the effects on flood risk reduction, the effects on flood risk reduction, they take some time. So eco-based DRR may take time to directly and measurably reduce disaster risks in terms of losses and damages, but co-benefits of green measures can be felt after a short while. As a strategy in highly disaster-prone contexts, this implies for us that structural hazard mitigation can still be useful to address immediate disaster risk, but these should be complemented by and successively replaced by ecosystem-based approaches with multiple benefits, such as strengthening livelihoods and reduce disaster risks on the longer term, when the grey infrastructure may not be effective again. So, to close my presentation, for us in Tajikistan, following a hybrid approach with a context-specific combination of grey and green ecosystem approaches is the right solution to go, with over time reaping the benefits of the early investment in green infrastructure and eco-based approaches, and potentially also reducing the necessity of further investing in grey infrastructure. Thank you very much, and with this I would like to hand back to Nina.
Okay, so the last part is on tools and resources that are available out there for you to refer to later on. And this is the final part of the presentation. So first, here's some selection of materials for flood management, some practical guides, really how to do nature-based flood management. The WWF has produced this extensive flood green guide, which I think also will come later on with its own training program. And then the guidance on the right is the World Bank guideline, to which I referred to earlier in the presentation. And then there's also one website on nature-based solutions for flooding. This is more US focus. But many of these are, you can apply them in your context as well. Here's some more on floods. The EU has this kind of extensive, detailed presentation on natural water retention measures in these two guides here on the left and in the center. And there's also a specific website as well, and they really describe also like what kind of measures are there in riverside buffers, in floodplains, it's really describes the measures themselves. So these are universal. And then in the United States also there's another one from the NOAA that has made another extensive guide on assessing the costs and benefits of natural flood management. And then for coastal guidelines, here's a few detailed guidelines for managing coastal hazards and flooding, such as the Building with Nature guidelines that are available on this website here in the bottom. And these are really also detailed guidelines step by step, and maybe sometimes very extensive as the ones on the right hand side. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers have developed this kind of manual on nature-based coastal resilience. And then here are a few more coastal guidelines. These ones are a bit shorter than the previous ones, so maybe more kind of accessible for a general overview. And they focus on tropical coasts, mangroves and reefs, well, except of course the New Jersey one on the left. And then on sustainable land management, as mentioned earlier, the Swiss NGO-DRR platform, together with VOCAT, has made recently this compilation that presents a large number of sustainable land management experience around the world. It's really a compendium, and it's got like a fact sheet presenting really different technologies that you can use and management examples. And there's also the VOCAT database as well, of course, and that website. And then there's a few kind of more multi-sectoral guidelines. The Green Infrastructure Guide for Water Management, it goes, on the left, it goes kind of beyond DRR, but it has many relevant examples and also information on cost-benefit assessment, and really on the different evaluation methodologies and also case examples as well. And then the IUCN has made this handbook that is addressed both to DRR managers and to protected area managers on how you can use protected areas for DRR. And a few more on another one on protected areas, this guide on resilience and adaptation planning on the left. And then there's an example of a guide on how to integrate ecosystems in the vulnerability and impact assessments. And then if you're looking for more training on the topic beyond this webinar, so here there's some courses. The MOOC, the first one, is still on actually, I think for another week or so, but it takes only a few hours to finish. So you can still log in and do that, and I'm sure it will be offered again freshly in the future, but I think this one closes by mid-March. And then also, let's say, the Green Recovery and Reconstruction Training Toolkit is quite useful, but it focuses on the recovery part. Some networks that exist on ecosystem-based DRR, and I'd like to highlight the first one, the Partnership for Environment and Disaster Risk Reduction. They have also a newsletter that you can subscribe to, and they have like a virtual library, an updated list of really all materials published on EcoDRR in the past years, from like academic articles to more general resources. And I'll move on to this next one, further reading. If you still want to know more about the concept on your own, or the science, then you should look at I think you can start with the two books here on the right. One is more on urban areas. And then in the two websites here on Prevention Web, you have a good collection also under the theme of environment and ecosystems. And then there's this also an inventory of tools for ecosystem-based adaptation that's available on this other website. So with this, I'd like to close my presentation and thank you for listening for this. And I'd like to then open the floor for any final questions and comments that you may have. And let's see, we have okay, let's see. Yes, yes, I'm looking at them. Okay, I'm sure some of these are maybe questions I can't answer to, but there's one that would system-wide principle be an obvious limitation to organizations that would be interested to implement? I don't think so. I think you look at, you look at the scale that's also suitable. I mean, that where you operate as well, and that's really your area of work. It's not that you will necessarily have action in the whole, in the whole watershed, but you should understand how the different parts of your, of the scale, how they impact each other, and what you should take into consideration also on those actions that are beyond your action, really. But you should look at things on a system and kind of holistically. Then we have how do you conserve or restore without excluding people from the respective areas? I think this is also a more general development question, of course, but as also I think Jana's case study showed, I mean, these are also areas, as we know, in natural resources, these are what the areas where people also depend on, and they are the users, and they are the actors in those areas as well, and it is not ecosystem-based DRI is not to create no-go protected areas or something like that, but it is to manage sustainably the natural resources and the ecosystems that are there, and also looking into restoring them for the benefit of the people, really, ultimately. So it's not by no means excluding people. If that's the question, if I understood your question correctly. Yeah, green financing, and we have the question about financing initiatives, tax credits, subsidize, what market instruments can best support the implementation of nature-based solutions. I must say this is not really my area of expertise. This really goes into like, payment for ecosystem services kind of solutions, or green bonds or whatever, green financing through tax subsidies. That's, yeah, it's not really my area of, and I would say, as with everything, environmental funding, you can look at, broadly your solutions from grant funding to national sources, but I don't have a clear, answer to that. Then let's see, do we have else? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, now you can hear me. Okay, I was muted. So I'm addressing the question on how different is this approach from the conventional interventions, and I think that's closely related to Evelyn's comment below. Yeah, so as Nina said in her first presentation, ecosystem-based DRR, or eco-DRR in short, it applies concepts, or it applies approaches that often are already there. Like integrated watershed management is not something, is not an approach that that is entirely new. But I think what it adds is really to make the link between disaster risk reduction and the protection, the conservation, and the sustainable management of ecosystems. So that you always keep in mind the use of ecosystems for disaster risk reduction, and the potential damage an unhealthy, a degraded ecosystem can have on disaster risk. So in that sense, it is new in terms of the perspective. It is often not new in terms of the measures and the mechanisms and the approaches. This is known, just the connection that you make and the frame that you put it in. This has certainly evolved much over the past decade. Okay, is there any urgent last question that needs to be addressed? I'll wait 5 seconds if I see what question coming up. Oh, I see one. Okay, last question. I forget. Now they are coming. How to go from here? Okay, you can, well, Nina gave you a lot of food for thought. Read through it, and you're always welcome to contact me. To contact Nina, you will find a presentation with all the resources on the website, and I will send you the link again. This being said, I would now like to come to the end and ask you one small favor to give us an insight of how did you like the webinar on a scale from 1 to 5. 1, I didn't like it at all, and 5, I really loved it. And yeah, be honest, give us, write some words or give us just a very brief feedback. I have another feedback form, a longer one prepared, to which I will send you the link. Okay, so we have 6 people, 7, thank you, 7 of 17, no, 15 still in the webinar. Okay. Yeah, this is very encouraging. We are still webinar newbies, so we appreciate this very much. Okay, so before we end, I have 2 last slides to show you that inform you about upcoming events that the Swiss NGO DRA platform organizes. So in 2018, we are organizing 3 one-day learning events in Switzerland, so in Zurich or in Bern. On DRR and education, DRR and climate change adaptation basics, and DRR and water. And you can sign up for these events using the link on the right. There will also be 2 webinars that we organize. One already now in March, the 27th of March, on disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation basics, and in September on risk assessments. So for all these events, you can register via drplatform.org/events. We also have a learning course, an e-learning course on disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation, which is a self-paced course, PowerPoint slides, which you can download, including a quiz, including important information, basic information on DRR and climate change adaptation. And yeah, feel free to download them and also provide your feedback, how you like it. And feedback to this course, you can provide it, and we will be very grateful if you did so, using this direct link. It's a Google Doc, a Google form, where you can just answer a few questions on how you like the webinar or what could be improved. And this will help us to further improve the experience for you and also, yeah, become better presenters and make the whole experience enjoyable for everyone. And with this, I would like to thank you for joining us today in the past 75 minutes. It was a lot of pleasure to talk to all of you. I hope it worked out fine technically as well. And thank you very much also in the name of the Swiss NGO DRA platform. And we hope to see you, hear you, and be in touch with you the next time. Bye-bye.